Here it comes, a loving sensation. Let's join hands and be one as a nation. We'll forget all the hatred and the greed. Now's the time for us to be free. We'll stand tall, together we will survive. Holding on for a tranquil peace of mind. Know your heart and where you are going. In a perfect world, love will be showing. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go. Are you ready? 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 Let's go.
Shalom Mishpachah, and welcome to Hebrew Bible Secrets with your host, Rabbi Beaton. We are reading today from the book of Acts, starting at chapter 10. Acts chapter 10, verse 1. 1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as an Italian cohort. 2. A righteous man, and one that feared Elohim with all his house, who exercised much beneficence towards the people and petitioned Elohim always. 3. He saw in a vision, evidently, about the 9th hour, a messenger of Elohim coming in to him and saying to him, Cornelius. 4. And he looked on him, and he was afraid, and said, What is it, Master? And he said to him, Your petitions and your beneficence are come up for a remembrance before Elohim. 5. And now send men to Yophel, Joppa, and call for one Shimon, whose surname is Kepha. 6. He lodges with one Shimon, a leather tanner, whose house is by the seaside. 7. And when the messenger which spoke to Cornelius had departed, he called 2 of his household servants, and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually. 8. And when he had declared all these things to them, he sent them to Yophel, Joppa. 9. On the next day, as they went on their journey, and drew near to the city, Kepha went up upon the housetop to petition about the 6th hour. 10. And he became very hungry, and would have eaten, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance. 11. And saw Shemaim opened, and a certain vessel descending to him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners, and let down to the earth. 12. Wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. 13. And there came a voice to him, Arise, Kepha, kill and eat. 14. But Kepha said, Not so, Master, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. 15. And the voice spoke to him again the second time, What Elohim has cleansed, that call not common. 16. This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up again into Shemaim. 17. Now while Kepha doubted in himself what this vision which he had seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Shimon's house, and stood before the gate. 18. And called and asked whether Shimon, which was surnamed Kepha, were lodged there. 19. While Kepha thought on the vision, the Ruach Spirit said to him, Behold, 3 men seek you. 20. Arise therefore, and go down, and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. 21. Then Kepha went down to the men which were sent to him from Cornelius, and said, Behold, I am he whom you seek. What is the cause? Why have you come? 22. And they said, Cornelius the centurion, a righteous man, and one that fears Elohim, and of good report among all the nation of the Yahudim, was warned from Elohim by his set-apart messenger to send for you into his house, and to hear your words. 23. Then he called them in and lodged them. And on the next day Kepha went away with them, and certain brothers from Yophel, Joppa, accompanied him. 24. And the next day, after they entered into Caesarea, and Cornelius waited for them, and had called together his family and near friends. 25. And as Kepha was coming in, Cornelius met him, and fell down at his feet, and bowed down to him. 26. But Kepha took him up, saying, Stand up, I myself also am a man. 27. And as he talked with him, he went in, and found many that were come together. 28. And he said to them, Unlawful for a man that is a Yehudi to keep company or come to one of another nation. But Elohim has showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. 29. Therefore, when you sent for me, I came to you without objection. I asked therefore, for what intent did you send for me? 30. And Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour, and at the 9th hour I petitioned in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing. 31. And said, Cornelius, your petition is heard, and your kind deeds are remembered before Elohim. 32. Send therefore to Joppa, and call here Shimon, whose surname is Kepha. He is lodged in the house of Shimon, a leather tanner, by the seaside, who, when he comes, shall speak to you. 33. Immediately, therefore, I sent for you, and you were kind enough to come. Now, therefore, we are all here present before Elohim, to hear everything that is commanded by the Master Yahweh. 34. Then Kepha opened his mouth and said, Of a truth I perceive that Elohim shows no partiality. 35. But in every nation he that fears him and works righteousness is accepted with him. 36. The word which Elohim sent to the children of Israel, preaching Shalom by Yahshua, the Messiah. He is master of all. 37. Which was proclaimed throughout all Yehudah, and began from Galil, after the immersion which Yehochanan, John, the son of Zechariah, preached. 38. How Elohim anointed Yahushua of Nazareth with the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, and with power, who went about doing good, and healing all that were oppressed of the devil, for Elohim was with him. 39. And we are witnesses of all the things which he did, both in the land of Yehudim, Judea, where many Hebrew people lived, and in Jerusalem, Yahshua, whom they killed and hanged on the nets, a tree. 40. Elohim raised him up the third day, and showed him openly. 41. Not to all the people, but to witnesses chosen before of Elohim, even to us. After he rose from the dead. 42. And he commanded us to proclaim to the people and to testify that it is he which was appointed of Elohim to be the judge of the living and the dead. 43. To him give all the prophets witness that through his name whosoever believes in him shall receive remission of sins. 44. While Kepha yet spoke these words, the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, fell on all of them which heard the word. 45. And they of the circumcision which believed were astonished, as many as came with Kepha, because that on the Gentile nations also was poured out the gift of the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit. 46. For they heard them speak with languages and magnify Elohim. Then Kepha answered. 47. Can any man forbid Ma'im, that these should not be immersed, which have received the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, as well as we? 48. And he commanded them to be immersed in the name of Yahushua. Then they asked him to remain for many days. Okay, so that now brings us to the end of Acts chapter 10. So let's go back and have a look at some of the footnotes in Acts chapter 10. Okay, so the first footnote we have is in verse 1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as an Italian cohort. Okay, so let's have a look at this Italian cohort. So we have here consisted of about 600 men, 1/10 of a legion. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 3. He saw in a vision, evidently, about the 9th hour, a messenger of Elohim. Okay, so let's have a look at this, messenger of Elohim. So the Malach, the angel, came to collect prayers of the saints in Jerusalem. Note also the Malachim monitored and watched over the temple sacrifices, as this was also the evening time of the sacrifice. Okay, so the Malach came to collect prayers of the saints in Jerusalem. Note also the Malachim monitored and watched over the temple sacrifices, as this was also the evening time of sacrifice. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 6. He lodges with one Shimon, a leather tanner, whose Beth, house, is by the seaside. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Whose Beth, house. So we have here, these words are missing in the manuscripts. He shall tell you what you ought to do. Okay, so these words are missing in the manuscripts. He shall tell you what you ought to do. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is a continuation. Is by the seaside. So let's have a look at this, by the seaside. So north side of the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, north side of the Mediterranean Sea. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 7. And when the messenger which spoke to Cornelius had departed, he called 2 of his household servants, and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually. Okay. And when the messenger, so let's have a look at this, and when the messenger, so the messenger was the Malach, was an angel. Okay. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 11. And saw Shemaim opened, and a certain vessel descending to him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners, and let down to the earth. Okay, so let's have a look at this, let down to the earth. So we have here representing the 4 parts of the world. Okay, also like saying the 4 corners of the earth. Okay, representing the 4 parts of the world. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 12. Wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. So let's have a look at this, fowls of the air. This is Drash of the house of Israel, who became Gentile nations, that were seen as different kinds of animals. Okay, so this is Drash of the house of Israel, who became Gentile nations that were seen as different kinds of animals. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 13. And there came a voice to him, Arise, Kepha, kill and eat. So let's have a look at this. And it reads, Christians confuse this passage with eating unclean foods, but the passage is not about food at all, but about bringing in the scattered house of Israel. It is not about eating unclean meats. Note that he saw the vision 3 times, and how amazing that they were now standing at his door, were 3 men, who were considered unclean at that time to Peter and the Jews. Okay, let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 14. But Kepha said, Not so, Master, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. So let's have a look at this. So note that even after Yeshua ascended to heaven, Peter was trustworthily practicing kosher eating, which is mandated for all believers and not just the Jews. Okay? So note that after Yeshua ascended to heaven, Peter was trustworthily practicing kosher eating, which is mandated for all believers and not just the Jews. Okay? So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 15. And the voice spoke to him again the second time. What Elohim has cleansed, that call not common. So let's have a look at this. So we have here, he was told not to call the men unclean and go and reach out to them. The Yahudim would not enter a Gentile man's home, considering it unclean and defiled, which would also defile them. So Yahweh had to send a vision to correct Peter's bias. The school of Shammai had imposed 18 articles, which were opposed by the school of Hillel. But many Pharisees were murdered at this time by the school of Shammai. The articles described how Jews should behave with the Gentile world. This is why Peter could not sit and enter a Gentile home, as he saw himself bound to those articles. But Elohim showed him that he is not bound to any of these 18 articles. Note that these 18 articles were abolished after the destruction of the temple by the school of Hillel, as they did not believe in such rigid and hostile positions against the Gentile world. Okay? So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 22. And they said, Cornelius, the centurion, a righteous man. So let's have a look at this, a righteous man. And it reads, in the first century, Yahweh-fearers were given two designations. Ger Sadiq, which meant a full convert to all the faith of the Abrahu, Hebrews, with circumcision and mikvah, immersion. The second category was Ger Tashav, which meant one who has taken the 7 Noahide laws, the minimum commandments to keep, but is not yet a Ger Zadik, because he has not had an immersion and circumcision. Cornelius was probably at the stage of Ger Tashav, followed by Ger Zadik, but biblically he would be qualified as a full Hebrew man after conversion with no bias. Please note, anyone who was not circumcised, irrelevant of status, was not allowed to enter the first century temple. See more on Acts 15 and 5. If a proselyte was circumcised but had not performed the prescribed ritual ablution, our Eliezer said, behold, he is a proper proselyte. For so we find that our forefathers were circumcised and had not performed ritual ablution. If he performed the prescribed ablution but had not been circumcised, our Joshua said, behold, he is a proper proselyte. For so we find that the mothers had performed ritual ablution but had not performed circumcised, or had not been circumcised. The sages, however, said, whether he had performed ritual ablution but had not been circumcised, or whether he had been circumcised but had not performed the prescribed ritual ablution, he is not a proper proselyte, unless he has been circumcised and has also performed the prescribed ritual ablution. Yevamot 46a. Okay, so let's quickly have a look at Acts chapter 15 verse 5. But there arose up certain of the Pharisees which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to guard the Torah of Musa. Okay, so we have a few footnotes here, so let's have a look at these. So, but there rose up certain of the sect. So let's have a look at this. So various sects of the Pharisees had agreed a formula for Ger Toshav. One who keeps the Noahide laws, the 7 stated, 1, such as the following. A. Prohibition of idolatry. B. You shall not have any idols before Elohim. Prohibition of murder. You shall not murder. Genesis 9 and 6. C. Prohibition of theft. You shall not steal. D. Prohibition of sexual promiscuity. You shall not commit any of a series of sexual acts. E. Prohibitions which include adultery, incest. F. Bestiality and male homosexual intercourse. G. Prohibition of blasphemy. You shall not blaspheme Yahweh's name. Dietary law. Do not eat flesh taken from an animal while it is still alive, or the arm or leg of a live animal. Genesis 9 and 4. Requirement to have righteous courts. You shall set up effective judicial courts the preceding 6 laws with justice and equity. These 7 Noahide law, though unbiblical, would enable one to be a ger teshav. However, these were invented by rabbis, and the Torah never calls these the Noahide laws. Okay, so we have another footnote, that it was needful to circumcise. So let's have a look at this. So we need to understand all laws are good. We need them to understand many important principles. Example, how we bury the dead, how we celebrate the feasts. So the 3rd century CE, Rabbi Judah the Prince, a righteous man, codified these in the Mishnah. This was a very important act to preserve all the laws the sages had understood and implemented from the Torah. He gathered all the great scholars at the time and had them write down all these in volumes of books. However, the book is not inspired. There were 6 sections to it as follows. Zeramin, seeds. Agricultural laws. Moed, season. Laws of Sabbath and festivals. Nashim, women. Marital law. Nezikim, damages, civil and criminal laws. Kodoshim, set apart things, laws of sacrifices. And Taharot, purities, laws of ritual purity. Then in turn, each section of the law was further divided into tractates, and then tractates into chapters, and chapters into subsections known as Mishnot. The Mishnah was not written with much background information, so there would be left a void. Therefore, the disciples of Rabbi Judah also compiled the Tosiftot and the Bara'itot, which allow the subject of the Mishnah to be examined in greater clarity and detail. The scholars who studied, examined, and interpreted the Mishnah are known as the Amoraim, which means teachers of or interpreters. These things have been studied in Israel, and the many yeshivas that are in Israel and throughout the world connecting back to Israel. One such Rabbi Ashi is known as one of the greatest scholars of his time, who combined his wealth and knowledge, wrote all these down. He and many others with him compiled the Gemara that is now in the flavor of the Babylonian Talmud. This is not inspired nor scripture, so take note. The Jerusalem Talmud had already been compiled about 100 years earlier. The Bavli, or Babylonian Talmud, is held to much more glory than the Jerusalem one. These are not inspired texts, but they do give you background information on how these rabbinic sects functioned. Note, Judah still has the scepter. See footnote Genesis 49 and 10 in the Hidden Truths Hebrew Scroll. One can understand why these Pharisees in Palace's time were so furious that foreigners coming in were allowed a loose hand. So this is why the whole trouble started. It is not about them and us, or Palace and the Pharisees, but simply that rules needed to be established that would allow an orderly conduct of the believers. And this is exactly what happened in this chapter of Acts in verses 15, 20 to 21, stipulating these things. Okay, so have a look at Acts 15, 20 to 21, and also have a look at Genesis 49 and 10 to read about Judah and why Judah has the scepter. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 28. And he said to them, "You know how that it is unlawful for a man that is a Yehudi to keep company or come to one of another nation. But Elohim has showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean." So let's have a look at this, common or unclean. So note, Peter knew this was not about food, but people. The 9th hour is anywhere between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. segment. Falling in with the school of Shammai, who refuse to go to the Gentiles. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 30. And Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour. And at the 9th hour, so let's have a look at this. So at the 9th hour, so this is the time of prayer and evening sacrifice. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 34. Then Kiva opened his mouth and said, "Of a truth I perceive that Elohim shows no partiality." So let's have a look at this. Many misunderstand this verse to say Elohim is no respecter of persons, then go on to say you can come any way you like. This is not true. Elohim shows no partiality to Torah keepers, but does have a way and conduct, as would any king with his subjects. Can anyone just get up and go to the king whichever way he likes? If for human kings there is such a restriction, then how much so for the King of the universe, who expects our conduct to be according to Torah. Okay? So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 85. But in every nation, he that fears him and works righteousness is accepted with him. Okay, so let's have a look at this, works righteousness. So works righteousness is a term for keeping Torah, and Yahweh wants all to keep his Torah, irrespective of nation, colour or creed. This also busts another myth that people keeping Torah will not be saved. In effect, it is saying the opposite. All people keeping Torah laws will be fully accepted by Yahweh. Okay? So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 43. To him give all the prophets witness that through his name whosoever believes in him shall receive remission of sins. So through his name, so let's have a look at this. So only Yahweh redeems, the rest is bogus. Okay, so only Yahweh redeems, the rest is bogus. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 46. For they heard them speak with languages. So let's have a look at this. So a known language and not gibberish, as many speak today. So this would have been a language, you know, some English, French, German, whatever, a language, not gibberish. Okay? So that now brings us to the end of Acts chapter 10. So I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the other side. This is Rabbi Beaton saying thank you for watching, and Shalom Shalom. Baruch Shem, Kivod, Makuto, Leolam Va'ed. Benevolent be the name of his esteemed kingdom, forever and ever and ever. Amen.